Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity, the collaborative process in supporting students in the new normal. I am Bailey Cornelius, the Digital Project Coordinator at NCEA, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. A few housekeeping notes as people are joining. We are recording the session. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A window. We will monitor any questions and try to answer them all in the allotted time. And please feel free to ask those questions whenever they pop up, as we will be trying to answer them live. At the end of this session, I will share a link to the online survey in the chat and instructions on how to receive a certificate of completion for the webinar. Today's presenters are Joy Roberts and Eric Frenette. Joy Roberts is on a mission to teach God's design for friendship to the next generation of leaders. Hailing from a small town of just 200, Joy's entrepreneurial spirit led her to co-found Frenzy, a nonprofit serving schools internationally since 2014, with scripturally based social, emotional, and character development programming. Joy has served as an organizational visionary, curriculum designer, author, teacher, mental well-being advocate, and platform speaker as Frenzy has grown to serve well over 250,000 students. She has an extensive career in business marketing and development and holds a Bachelor's of Science in Business Management, Master's in Biblical Theology, and is in the process of completing her doctorate in educational leadership from Marymount University. All of these experiences have undoubtedly prepared her for the role of Frenzy co-founder. Joy will tell you the courage and tenacity needed to propel the vision of Frenzy and the learned skills of resilience after hardship all came through God's grace. Outside of Frenzy, she enjoys spending time with her husband of 30 years, 2 adult sons, friends, and the most recent family additions of 2 golden doodles, Jelly and Bean. Eric Frenette is an elementary school principal and licensed professional counselor in the state of Connecticut at St. Joseph's School. Having graduated from the University of Connecticut with his master's in school counseling, his career began as a public high school counselor before finding his vocation in Catholic education. Through this vocation, Eric has enjoyed working with students and families by bringing together the academic, spiritual, and social emotional growth of a child to one mission: to educate the whole child. While being principal of St. Joseph's School, Eric has also worked with private practices as an LPC. His experience as an LPC began with bereavement counseling, but now includes child, adolescent, and marriage counseling. He is currently interested in the application of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy to these areas of focus. Eric recently wrote for Frenzy's high school curriculum, focusing on these areas. Having merged his 2 areas of professional experience, Eric has become interested in the changing nature of how children learn and how families support the developmental educational process as a result of cultural and technological changes. He has also served as assistant superintendent for the Archdiocese of Hartford. He enjoys the outdoors and is married to his best friend, Sarah, with whom he has 2 sons. Before I turn it over to our presenters, let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Father, thank you for all these men and women who have given their talents to educating our young people. Through the challenges they encounter each day, lead them to an ever deeper appreciation of the sacred duty to which you have called them. May they be people of integrity so that they can be witnesses as well as teachers. We pray that the schools that they lead will become places where our young people can experience your love in their lives. Thank you for our Catholic schools. Help us to pray without ceasing, to work without wavering, and to give without grudging in order to ensure the future of Catholic education for all of our children. We make this prayer through your Son, Jesus Christ, our teacher and our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now I will hand it over to Joy and Eric.
Well, welcome everyone. It is great to be able to launch into a conversation with you. Again, I'm Joy Roberts, and I am really excited that we have the privilege and honor of having Eric here to really lead and help us engage in a meaningful conversation today that we hope is relevant. We know this is a webinar, but we like to have you talk back to us. So if you have your chat functions up and open, we encourage you to put where you're from and who you are. It's just always good to know that we're actually talking to real people and not just computers. So welcome. We encourage you again to use the chat function and give us feedback along the way. Just giving you a highlight of what you're going to expect in our conversation today is we're going to be talking about the cultural shift that we're seeing in students. And so we're talking about their mental health needs, we're talking about behaviors, and we're even talking about a wider range of academic skills. And so we realize in talking to educators that you know this, you're on the front lines and you're seeing this. And so we want to talk about, again, the cultural shifts that we're seeing in students. And we want to talk about parents. What has changed or is changing in the cultural landscape of parents? How are parents responding? And how do we as educators respond to all of this individually and collectively as Catholic schools? And so this is kind of teeing us up for this conversation. You're going to get lots of nuggets of wisdom and insight. So with that in mind, our first question that Eric and I want to pose to you all, again, get some engagement from you. What are you seeing in your classrooms? And Eric, you are in the classrooms every day, day in and day out. What are you seeing in the classrooms today?
That is true. So as you know, as principal, I'm walking around the schools all the time. I hear the feedback from the teachers and from the families and the students. And I think one of the common things we're seeing is just a rise in a lot of behaviors that are interrupting the flow of a school day. And it could be academics. We're seeing a much wider range in academic abilities in our students within a grade level. We're seeing a much wider range and more diversity in what the behavioral needs are of students from pre-K all the way up through high school. We're seeing social emotional needs. We're seeing, just kind of a constant change. I think my teachers have said every year seems to be getting different. There's no consistency from year to year since COVID. And I think that's true. I think we're just seeing this kind of continual shift and we're not really sure what's driving it, but it's definitely interesting to see all the different things that are happening.
I'm going to pop up some of the responses, and anyone that has additional responses, you can add them. This is a word cloud and it will continue to update. But these are some of the comments that we've had from educators, that we're seeing from educators. Eric, what resonates with you as you look at this word cloud? What part do you think feels relevant for what you're seeing and what you're hearing?
Right. I mean, I'm seeing some that are standard things that you would expect to see on a list like this going back, 10 years ago. Fidgety, right? Chatty students, sadly, probably even low self-esteem. But these are kind of inherent issues that I think every teacher is going to be familiar with on some level. And I think that there's always been that kind of constant. That is a separate issue that I think is kind of falls into this realm, but then I think we see the things that pop out to me is disrespect, tantrums, bullying, kids fighting, threatening, external motivation, not fully present. These are the things that I think we're seeing a rise in across the board, and it's becoming the most disruptive in the sense that they don't respond to normal interventions. They're not responding to school discipline policies or codes of conduct. They're falling outside the realm of the classroom policies, and this is what I think is creating the most frustration with our teachers. But a lot of this is definitely, looking at those that are out there, you're not alone.
Yeah, I think as educators, we often feel like we're operating in silos, or that's happening in my school. But I think the bigger picture of this conversation is that we are seeing a cultural shift, which is literally this shift that's happening in culture. So Eric, when you process this and you consider what's happening, what is the first thing that comes to mind for you that we as educators can do or need to consider?
Well, I think there's two things, and the first one requires the second. And I think you have to focus on the relationships that you have within your school community. That's, teacher to parent, administrator to teacher, teacher to student, across the board. All those relationships are critical in getting to the bottom of what's going on. If we can't talk to each other with trust and with, kind of open and honest, then there's always going to be the back and forth, and it's always going to be us versus them mentality. But in order to have trust, I think that the biggest thing you need to have is humility. You need to be able to be willing to kind of check your ego and have a conversation with somebody that you know how it's going to go, but you know, you have to know how to talk to them. And I think the biggest barrier in the way a lot of times is our ego, where, you know, I know they're not doing their job, so I'm going to tell them that. And you're not going to get the response that you need in order to help the child or to fix the problem. So I think checking that ego and then really working on those formative relationships in your building. You know, Valmar, my superintendent, always says those courageous conversations you really need to have in order to get anything, any intervention off the floor.
Well, when you're thinking about parents, I think parents can be our biggest advocates and assets in schools, but they can give us our biggest angst as well. Like
Right.
those hard conversations, if we're honest, I think having stressful days and stressful conversations, I think a natural policy would be, or response would be, to withdraw or try and avoid conversations with parents. But you're saying that we have to build trust as a foundation, even though it's difficult and hard, and it starts with humility.
You know, I think in education, especially in Catholic education, we're servant leaders, and you have to be, you know, I don't know, read scripture and Jesus will tell you what you need to do. I think we need to turn that other cheek, and we really need to figure out how do we serve, and it's not for the paycheck. You know, it has to be for the mission, for the purpose of why we're doing what we're doing in our vocation. And that takes a lot of humility and a lot of patience and a lot of support from those around you. But I think that's, you know, kind of the direction we need to move in. And not that we're not, but I think it's just we need to remind ourselves constantly of that.
One thing I picked up on when you were talking about this is the fact that parents have a hard time hearing that their students aren't perfect or that their students have challenges.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those courageous conversations are, how do you have those meaningful conversations with parents?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult task. It's funny, teachers to me will always like they're the most they're the most they talk the most about the families that they love, you know, how great this parent is or this parent, but then they're also like the most resistant to maybe call a parent about a difficult conversation. And I think if you can create that conversation or that relationship early, if you first month of school, and I know teachers do this, or a lot, you know, a lot of teachers do this, that first month of school, you're creating that contact before there's an issue, before there's a concern. You're just, hey, this is me, this is what I'm doing this year. Feel free to reach out. Invite them into your classroom. My math teacher, Mr. Hool, he invites the 8th grade families every year in September to a parent homework help night so that they know how to help their child with the math homework and algebra as they go on the year. Those little things go a long way, and it really helps get that parent on your page. If they don't trust you, they're not going to hear you. And I think just making them know who you are allows you to then have to, when you have to pick up that phone and have that courageous conversation, they're at least going to give you a chance to talk, you know, and it's not going to be on automatic defense mode, which is any of us. Any of us is told something that we don't like or we don't agree with, or, you know, at the worst case scenario, your child isn't doing well, and our mind takes that as I'm not doing my job, so how dare you say that? They're going to be defensive. So if it's coming from a safe place, if you will, somebody that they know and they trust, then at least the message may get through, and then you can start to build, you know, how are we going to handle this?
Yeah. So when they like you, they listen more.
Right.
Eric, when does school get out for you? You're in the final throes of this school year. When do you let out? And are you doing
June 14th,
anything-
not that I'm counting or anything.
Not that June 14th is less than a
Right.
month away.
Yeah, I think it's
So
15 days. I think
Yeah.
something like that.
you can do it. So is there anything that comes to mind as you wrap up a school year and you think about formative relationships? Because we're talking about what we can do at the beginning of the year. Is there any way that we can end well? Like most of us are coming to the end of our school year, and some of us in the next week, some of us in the next month.
Right.
Is there anything that we can be doing now as we finish strong in developing formative relationships that are built with trust with our parent community?
Yeah, one thing I'm doing at my school, we do a survey, which I strongly encourage surveys all the time. It's just, you know, a quick Google form and you get some information. Families feel like they have a voice. But based on those survey results that I did back in March, there was a couple areas that a handful of families have identified as areas that they feel the school could grow. So I've created they're like parent conversation meetings. So Thursday morning, right after drop off, bring your coffee, come meet me in the library, and we're going to have a conversation about X. So we did one on the discipline policy and the code of conduct. We're doing one on Catholic identity. We're doing one on curriculum and extracurriculars and stuff like that. And it's just whatever's identified, instead of sweeping it under the floor or saying the school board's going to handle it. Like, I feel even if there's something I don't agree with or something that I can't change necessarily, you know, I want to invite them in so they feel heard, that they know me. I can better understand where they're coming from. They know why maybe I can or can't do something about it, instead of emails don't always translate well. So having that face-to-face conversation goes a long way. And I think just being in the school during the school day while the kids are buzzing around also helps, so the parents see what it's like. And that's a real easy thing to do. But again, you have to be willing to invite potential courageous conversations into your building. And, you know, but you have your limits. I set 10 parents, you know, if there's 20 parents that sign up, then I'll create a second session, but keep it manageable. But that's a real simple task. We have a teacher committee at the end of the year to kind of look back on this year. What went well, what didn't well, what can we do next year? We're looking at meet the teacher night, maybe having that a different structure that allows for a little bit more effectiveness out of it, instead of just a crazy zoo of kids coming and going all evening long. It's going to be a little bit more of a personal conversation with families and teachers. So constantly being willing to look honestly and objectively at what's going on in your school or in your classroom, and, you know, what can you do differently and what can you do to at least, again, try to bring those people that you really need to reach, because every teacher knows the kid who needs the most attention is the one whose parents don't come to conferences. So how do you get them in the building, and how do you get them, you know, to help you with what you need to do?
What we're talking about today, as we jump into this conversation around cultural shifts, is the importance of relationships. And so we know that we're the most technologically connected generation that has ever existed. This dates back, and you're going to get into this, Eric, back to 2010 with the advent of cell phones and technology and video games and social media. But we're the most technologically connected, but we're the most socially disconnected. So when you're talking about relationships being the priority and being the foundation, I think there's work that we can do. And I think that's what you're recommending, is invest in relationship. And I feel like it's like a squeaky wheel or a rusty wheel. Like, we need to work out some of the kinks, because our relational connections are shifting with this cultural shift that we're experiencing. So, Eric, talk to me a little bit about this cultural shift. Like, what does it look like? What's happening?
Right.
What are you seeing and noticing?
So I mean, I'm just gonna, again, I'm speaking really specifically to my experiences, but, you know, I'm a little bit generalizing too. But I think if anyone looks at middle school right now, you're gonna see a different type of student in middle school than you did 3 to 5 years ago. Even it's just, there's this change happening, and what is it? And I think COVID's the easy scapegoat. I mean, everybody wants to blame COVID for everything, and it did have an impact. It did have a major impact, but I think it also just made things that were already happening much more, you made it realize it a little bit more, and it also amplified things. Technology in its sense, right? Just the presence of technology in general has always been a scapegoat. I mean, when I was young, you watch too much TV, your brain's gonna melt. You know, video games caused all the problems in the world. Music caused all the problems in the world. You know, technology is an easy one. We're going to talk a little bit more about technology, and then I end up blaming it for some things. But, you know, I think those two are just like the easy answers. But we're seeing a change in the culture, I really think. And by culture, I mean just like how the expectations of our communities right now. You know, parents are changing. We've always seen them, but the helicopter parents. But now there's the absentee parent. There's also, and I'm guilty of this, you know, the busy parent. Me and my wife find ourselves, we just don't have time to do all these things that are being sent home with the kids. I, as the principal of my school, asked teachers to require everyone to have parents sign their homework books so we can verify that parents are checking their kids' homework. I forgot to do it a lot because I'm busy, you know, and that's an excuse, but I think it is a reality. I don't know exactly if it's one more than one or the other, but this is a common thing that we're seeing with parents now. We're just too busy for this, yet they're also able to sign their kid up for 3 travel baseball teams. So, but those are, I think, are the reality. Students, social media has had a huge impact on behaviors of children, and we'll get more into that. And a lot of that impact we see as it trickles down reduces the resiliency, reduces the social skills, creates this lack of time management, organizational skills, which I kind of really saw clearly with my son, which I'll reference in a little while. But we're just seeing this change, and that ties to parents where, parents want to remove their child from any uncomfortable situation. So, oh, this class is too hard, let's drop it, which I did in college, but we won't tell anyone that. If this child is giving you a hard time at recess, we're going to call the principal and have them chastise that child, when it could be just age appropriate drama, right? Age appropriate conflict that they need to figure out for themselves. I had one parent, I like to think he was joking, I'm not sure if he was, said like the kids should just fist fight it out in the parking lot. I'm like, well, I can't do that. But we can have them talk it out, and if that doesn't work, then we can get involved. So I think all these things are connected, and it's creating this kind of new normal that we talk about.
Mhm. Eric, are you seeing a shift in how students engage with each other? So we're talking about the parents and how parents are parenting. We're talking about how students are responding in this cultural moment with technology and reduction of what I really call, coming from frenzy, emotional competency skills, their ability to ask for help, say, I'm sorry, keep trying when things are hard. Engage in hard conversations and sort it out when they have tension out on the blacktop, or ask a friend to sit with them and invite them into a conversation. And so look people in the eye. And so these are all, we like to call them soft skills. But when you think about this shift with students being really busy in 3 travel leagues and in band practice and having very scheduled lives, that also leads to a reduction in face-to-face time with other students. And so what are you seeing what is the data telling us in how students are engaging relationally with each other?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key factors at play here, is that students don't know how to interact with each other or with adults. And I think you mentioned the soft skills. That's one thing I remember taking away from my Catholic education was I went off to high school and college. I knew how to talk to my teachers if I needed help. I knew how to organize my stuff and figure out a problem. Like, here's the problem. I have to do 3 things, and they're all due Wednesday. I figured out a plan. And I knew how to like talk with friends when there was conflict. And I don't think kids know how to do that inherently anymore. And it goes back to even the TV shows that we had back in the day compared to now, where there was actually storylines that had a rising tension, a resolving conflict, and now it's 20-minute clip shows. I think there's a lot at play that's taking these soft skills that we take for granted our kids have, and they don't have, and we need to remember that we have to teach that to them. You bring up this data here, which I think is, again, kind of really puts a picture on it. This is from a new book I'm reading that I highly recommend if anyone's interested in just the effects cell phones are having on our kids. The Anxious Generation. I'm gonna hold it up just so you can see it. Great book. And it talks about, so the smartphone, the iPhone came out in 2010, and it was iPhone 4, I believe, and it had the rear-facing camera. And this author, Jonathan Haidt, really explains how that had this waterfall effect on the mental health of kids. So you see here in 2010, 2011, there's a dramatic drop in boys and girls hanging out with each other after school. The scary part with this statistic is they did like an isolated high school case study where, okay, well, this child doesn't have a cell phone. Is it the same effect, obvious on this child? If the majority of kids in a community have a cell phone, then the majority of the kids aren't hanging out, aren't socializing after school, aren't having these really critical social contacts that create a lot of these, or that reaffirms these soft skills that they have. So just the presence of a cell phone, even if you do your best job as a parent to keep your child from it, but they're exposed to others who are, they're reaping this negative effect. And that's just such a scary thing as a parent, but also, as an educator. So we see that, the more that kids are hanging out with each other in a social, synchronous moments, it's having an impact on their ability to have to really reinforce these skills.
When students have the opportunity to play together, it's actually where they learn those
Right.
skills, like where they get in conflicts, or when they have close formative relationships that they see every day and that are part of their community, which is very different than being on a cell phone where you engage with many people at one time versus these one-on-one
Or objectively not
conversations.
at all, like where you're just posting content, but no, you're not really interacting.
Well, it vests people in relationships. So when these students, like when they go to recess or they sit next to each other at lunch, that's where they're actually forming relationships and they're learning how to work through conflict. They're learning to practice social perspective taking. And I say this because my two sons, one is 23 and one's 25. And so they've graduated from college. They both have their first jobs. I've looked at the data. The number one occupational need in the marketplace today is soft skills, Eric. The
Yeah, I
ability to
believe it.
organize, to look people in the eye, to ask for help when you need it, to problem solve and critical thinking, and all of these executive function skills with delayed gratification and managing big emotions when they come up. Like one of my sons, he had a job. He had the job offer 9 months before he started and graduated from college. And then a month before graduation, they rescinded the offer. The company was having financial challenges and he had to be resilient. He had to bounce back. He had to re-engage, go into problem solving mode, work through difficult emotions and work through fear of failure. And these are low vulnerability skills that students learn at an early age, so that when they get to be 23 and they lose their job, they have the emotional competency skills to actually navigate that in a way that's healthy and constructive. But they have to have the opportunity to learn it and practice it in the context of a school setting.
Well, I think every educator or every principal at least has probably gotten some phone calls of parents who, are their child is doesn't, is being bullied, right? And not to belittle bullying, but my child's being bullied, and what it is they just don't like another kid, and it's like they don't know how to work through someone annoying them. And I think that that's such an important skill because we're going to be annoyed by a lot of people as we get on in life, and I think that's something that these kids aren't equipped with, and that is then feeding a lot of these issues we're seeing in classrooms and in schools.
Mhm. Okay, so let's look at another slide with data and get some context from you and perspective.
Yeah,
Data
this one
Times.
is interesting. I mean, it shows the importance of and educators, I'm sure you all understand the importance of brain development, and that, the 15 to 24-year-olds, their brain for the most part is still developing. And to expose children or teens or preteens or even young adults to the effects of social media, that this cultural shift we're seeing with the technology, has a huge impact on how they develop. And, we're a little bit more resilient as we age out of that critical mass. But, and I did the numbers in this, I mean, I did it very quickly. But this just kind of caught me off guard. I'm reading this book and you're thinking preteens and teens and the impact, but parents who are putting their children in pre-K 3, pre-K 4 right now were 12 or 15 10 years ago. And now they're the parents whose kids are in our school. So it's one thing that we have to think about. Yes, like the children are being, affected by this data. But now our school families are potentially, not all of them, but some of them may be the result of this kind of cultural shift in, apples and trees. So if the parents don't have these skills that they would have gotten from these social interactions, and they have these negative impacts of social media and technology, well, the children could potentially now be having it. And I think it's an important thing to realize because if you just throw water at a fire, it's just going to kind of fizzle it out, but it's going to catch again. And you have to look at the whole problem and really know how far do we have to go with this, and how do we really intervene.
Next data I want to look at is about anxiety. And so this book that you and I read, The Anxious Generation, really highlights, and I've had some anecdotal conversation with some of my youngest coworkers, and there's a lot of identification with the term anxiety, being
Right.
anxious, feeling overwhelmed, and it's almost a label that this generation wears. But talk to us about what you're seeing in the data, and how is this relevant for us as educators?
I mean, just to talk personally, before COVID, I have worked for private practices as an LPC, so I've seen clients and stuff, part time over the years. I never I had to really seek out opportunities to do that. The counseling places, had their staff, and that they didn't really want anybody else. Since COVID, I mean, I get 3 emails a week of people looking to fill counseling positions. So, and I don't know if COVID just made it more common to talk about. I think it's twofold. I think it did, but also there's a rising need. And I think it's true. I mean, you look at the statistics here, 139% increase since 2010. That's insane. That's crazy. It's all the way down. There's an increase, but it's really for that 18 to 25. And if you talk to anyone on a college campus, you're going to see the same statistics. Dropout rates are through the roof. We're pushing these kids to really excel at what they do. But I think of Dr. Tim Klein, who wrote a book on the purpose mindset. A lot of these kids are doing it, but they're not even sure why. And that's going to feed this anxiety, and helping them understand, like, what is your purpose in doing these things really helps put up a resistance against these anxieties. But it's a separate story for a different day. But, I really think that for this chart, for me at least, it really clicked that not only are the kids more anxious and depressed than they were 3 years ago, 10 years ago, but the parents are too. And again, goes back to what we were talking about the last slide. If the families are anxious, then the kids will likely be anxious, and then that's going to kind of stem. And it's no longer just a classroom issue, because anything we do for 6 hours a day can be undone the minute they leave us. So we really have to think about not only how do we help our students, but how do we help our families, and how do we help each other too, because this also could be our colleague right next door to us.
Mhm. Yeah, anxiety is real. And there's a lot of fear of failure attached to this, which I think goes back to the cultural shift that we see, where we're not allowing students to fail. Like, we provide curated environments and not allowing them to not do well in math, or it's not okay to not get straight A's. And so I think that contributes to the anxiety that we're seeing in students. Just how do we as educators create space for our students to fail and then recover from failure to build that muscle?
Right. Yeah, that growth mindset. And again, I think the key factor in that is those formative relationships. If the student feels safe to take those risks, to really, be open and honest with themselves, and to try things that are different, and to be willing to fall down because they know somebody's going to pick them up. I mean, that's huge. That's huge. And I think that alone, the formative, and I don't have the data, but I know that I've read it in the past in various places, is the amount of formative relationships, or the quality of formative relationships that you have, is a great reduction in that anxiety and that depression, because you know that you have that support system in place. So as much as those kids can, little Johnny, poor Johnny, he's always being blamed for everything. But if Johnny drives you nuts, he's the one who needs you the most. And especially in Catholic education, like, that's who we're there for. We need to be more present for Johnny than anyone else, if that's the day that Johnny needs us, and I think that's easier said than done, but why we're here.
Well, now you're touching on what I'm passionate about. And as a Frenzy school, that we're all about relationship, like creating a climate and culture where students feel safe and heard, and where we teach kids how to be really good friends. Like, that's the mission and vision of Frenzy, because we know that strong relational connections provide a protective barrier against anxiety, against depression, against self-harm. It's just a very foundational tool that we're lacking in this cultural context, in this cultural moment.
No, I think Frenzy is great because it hits on all those things that we've already talked about. It creates a common language throughout a school system. So, everyone's using kind of the same lingo and the same catchphrases, and each, like a student first grade knows what the eighth grade teacher might be talking about. It really creates like an emotionally safe space indirectly. But it does, the curriculum itself then touches on all these different areas. So I mean, it definitely addresses a lot of what we've been talking about.
Mhm.
This
Okay,
slide, I
talk to
think,
us about depression.
yeah, well, I mean, more, not so much, I mean, depression, yes, it's important and it needs to be talked about, but I think I felt the need to add this slide just mainly for if you see the difference in what these effects are having on girls and boys. And in grad school and education and even, still today, it's still kind of prevalent. The statistics show that like boys get a lot of the attention when it comes to behaviors or, interventions and that kind of thing. And while that has some truth to it, I think we have to really be aware that girls are suffering often silently, and if we don't acknowledge that and we don't look at this and be shocked at what the culture really is what's leading this, and what girls are exposed to on a daily basis through social media, and then by their peers who are being exposed to things on social media. I think it's such a detriment to our society. So I think it's really important that we do acknowledge that girls are often being impacted so much more than boys in terms of the negative effects of social media and the culture, and reaching out to them and making sure that there's supports in place for them as well.
Well, girls spend a lot of time on social media, and it's that comparison, that social
Right.
comparison. And
Right.
so once they see the social media feeds and they look in the mirror, it begins this process that spirals down.
Right.
Boys, the data is telling us, are spending a lot of time on video games and engaging. And so we see a lot of versus depression, we see a lot of disruptive behavior, social aggression, things that are outward. And I think, Eric, you're highlighting that girls are turning inward. And a lot of times we see the outward expression from boys, from anger, turning tables, yelling,
Right.
aggressive outburst. And so it's more visible. And so it's requires us to address it.
Right, absolutely. And I think, I mean, back in the day before social media and smartphones, there was still conversations about the impressions that marketing and advertisement have on girls. And now it's in their pocket 24 hours a day for them to open up and to be, basically judged. And that's just, have obviously the effects are obvious. I'm gonna just go quickly through these. These are just some personal examples I've had it in my experience that I think are important to kind of mention. It touches on a lot of these different topics of the changing culture. The first one is actually a me story. So I was driving recently by a park in my town, and I saw a parent sitting on a bench, and her maybe 2-year-old child was tiptoeing around on a curb, like, I don't know, 100 feet away from her, but within a fenced in area. And I'm like, how dare that parent not be present for that child? And then it dawned on me because I'm reading this book and I'm like, that child is learning how to have independent play and is exploring. And there's this kind of generational parent guilt syndrome that I think at least my generation has, that like I have friends who every weekend there's fully booked schedules for their children to go to every museum and show and thing. And that's great. And, not belittling that by any means, but there's also a time that kids need to just be kids and they need to go out and fall down and learn how to get in an argument. I remember we moved into a neighborhood that had a lot of kids, and I remember initially I was like out there refereeing. I'm like, hey, go over there, take time out. And I'm like, no, I just got to let them figure it out. And, it's that parent guilt. I think social media again kind of pushes that, or just a response of maybe too much lack of parents from like, the old days, but it's not a bad thing. And I think again, everything we're talking about is a thin line where it's too much this way is bad, too much this way is bad. You have to find that delicate dance, but I think we need to let kids be kids to a point and figure out their way, and not, judge parents for those that maybe are letting them go a little bit more independence, which we'll touch on in a second one. The fourth grade socializer. So my oldest son's in fourth grade, and he doesn't get on technology a lot. Big surprise there, but he really wanted to go on and like Zoom with his friends after school one day under the guise of some project that we found out wasn't really going on, but it was fine. So we let him on, and it's like 3-4 screens of kids talking over each other. One's yelling, one's doing something else, like playing a video game while it's like on the floor facing the ceiling. It was the most chaotic, anxiety-inducing moment of my life. My son was fine with it. And I'm just like, no wonder you can't keep track of your math book. You know, like, I mean, if this is the norm socializing for fourth graders these days, it's makes sense as to why these soft skills we talked about before are such a challenge, because they're not being reinforced. Back in the day, you get on total phone, you got to figure out, all right, who am I going to call? Then who are you going to call? And that's, you know, that's a skill. I think it was organization. You had to figure it out. You had to work together. Compared to like fourth grade social gathering, where when he's outside with the neighbors, like they're all coordinating, you're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then they build this massive thing in a tree, and it's amazing. So I think just seeing the difference today between what kids expect as socializing is contributing to a lot of those behaviors we're seeing in the classroom related to those soft skills that we mentioned. The textbook education and textbook lack of communication. I mean, this is a parent thing I've noticed a lot of, that they think that textbook, or like, you know, everything on the test should be like right there on the study guide, and you know, basically everything should be hand fed to the kids so they can get that A, so they can get into that competitive college. And it's like there's no lesson learned there. Like they have to learn how to kind of grapple with what's going to be on that test, how'd the last test go, what do I need to figure out this time, what do I need to bring home, instead of in sixth grade being told, make sure you have this, this, and this. We had a meeting in my school with a group of parents who we were having these issues in the classroom. We're like, let's get to the bottom of it. We call all the parents in. I have all the middle school teachers come present. It was a great meeting because at the end of it, I think both sides learned something. The parents learned, like, hey, we need to be a little bit more on top of like our kids and make sure that we set expectations for them, and maybe get them the extra help that they need outside of the classroom. But then my teachers, and I think this is a common thing with teachers, is I think the go-to default mode is like the parents just don't care. Then that's why they don't do, like, that's why they're not making the kid learn the multiplication tables or doing like checking their homework. But it's that the parents don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And back in the day, I mean, I don't remember my mom being as involved, but now we're expecting parents to be involved. We also have to kind of make sure we're communicating with them what we want their role to be. So it really was a come to the table meeting, and everybody left with a different perspective. And, you know, we're still working on things, but it was a good start to that formative relationship that we had talked about. Authoritarian versus authoritative leadership, that's any intro to psychology class, you're going to learn about that. But I think, you know, I've spoken with some teachers over the years who, well, you know, you need to like just force parents to do this. I'm like, they're not going to pay tuition to come me tell them how to parent. And that goes back to that conversation. How do I get this person with this perspective to my side, or to at least this to work together to solve this problem? You know, and I think, you know, authoritative has much better odds at really getting people to understand, this is why we're doing it, this is why I can't do what you want, but this is why I need you to come here. Like, let's talk about that. And I just feel that goes a long way than just being really if you don't like it, here, go. You know, like, great, they're either going to leave or they're not going to change, and then you still got a problem on your hands. So, and then the last one, just real quick, the Frenzy Fridays and classroom guidance. You know, how do we handle this lack of soft skills that we talked about? How do we handle these individual student behaviors, or these individual needs that we're seeing? At our school, we started Frenzy Friday. So instead of religion on Friday, which Frenzy nicely pairs so well with our religion curriculum, the teachers do Frenzy, and it's, you know, it's a day where the Frenzy topics are being discussed. And then we can also touch on studying skills, note-taking, those other things that I think that students are lacking because of all the factors we've talked about already.
Okay, Eric, you are a wealth of content and perspective. And so in our last handful of minutes, I think we should get really practical and talk about what tools do we have for students and teachers and even parents, like how we engage with them. And so would love to have you kind of share your thoughts and your perspective on really what are next steps and actions that we can take that very specifically helps us handle and navigate and engage with students in a way that is helpful, a whole child approach, relationally centered.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to go through relatively quickly, but I think, you know, we have to first know what's going on. And I think Frenzy is great because they have the survey at the beginning of each year and at the end of the year to see like what are the needs in your community in terms of social emotional wellness. But school surveys, like I said, 10 questions really can capture the essence of what's going on in your school. Google Forms, send it out, and you really get a sense of what are the families dealing with, what are the kids dealing with, what's the faculty dealing with. If you don't know, if you think you know what you're dealing with and you're missing the mark, you're just wasting time. So I always a big fan of surveys, getting feedback, those parent conversations I talk about. I really encourage my teachers to use their PLC time to talk together. You know, what are you seeing in your classroom? What am I seeing in my classroom? Oh, I tried this with this kid. It worked really well. When I was at the high school and I brought it to the elementary school was like tiered intervention planning. So like there's a group of teachers from all different walks of life that would meet in cohorts. And if a teacher had an issue with a student, they would bring it to that cohort and basically, you know, troubleshoot possible intervention strategies. They would assess, they would reevaluate, try something different. Those little things go a long way. And I'm sure most schools are doing that, but just understanding the importance uh, to acknowledge that or to make sure it's being used the most effective way, because we all know PLCs can turn into just
Mhm.
vent sessions, which is useful sometimes, but you need to use it so that there's something to take away from it. School-wide initiatives, you know, making sure that you're the right intervention point, and that's something that comes from counseling. Like you have an emotion tied to a behavior, tied to an action, or a emotion tied to a feeling, tied to a behavior. You want to make sure you're intervening in the right spot, because if you're not, then again, you're wasting time. So knowing like where is the best place to intervene with this issue. All right, we have a bunch of parents that aren't engaged, aren't showing up to meetings. How do we address that? That's going to be a different intervention than the ones who are helicopter parents, right? Or the kid who just has, you know, who's fidgety, like we talked about in the beginning. So really knowing like what it is you need to do. You know, we have the kids for 6, 7 hours a day. That's good and bad. You know, it's good that we have them for that much time and we can create a consistent place with expectations that kids really do thrive with. But then they're going to go home and the parents are going to definitely reinforce anything that's being reinforced at home. So again, understanding that dynamic and how can we intervene with it, making sure your school culture and climate mirrors the problems you're seeing, the interventions you're trying. If you're really pushing social emotional wellness and you have those two teachers who like aren't doing it, then it undermines everything you're trying. I mean, like any good PBIS system, everyone has to be on board, or it's just another thing that the kids are going to realize, oh, so and so doesn't do it, this isn't important. You know, and then really again, we're going back to it because I think it's that important, like really figuring out what's the best way to foster collaborative informative relationships in your school. Every school is going to be different. Every school is going to, you know, have different barriers to that, and identifying those and then knowing how to get everybody on the same page.
Mhm. This is a great overview for students, and I think it segues into this conversation with parents. And again, what resonates with me, we ended with relationships and talking about students and friendships, and we're starting the parent conversation coming back to relationships, which is where we started the conversation, which is
Right.
why Eric, as part of Frenzy, relationally centered, is so foundational for students being successful
Right.
in the classroom and successful in life. It's foundational for us as teachers and how we engage with parents and how we engage with each other, so that we're not
Right.
operating in silos as teachers in our individual classrooms, but we're actually engaged in community, which I would say Catholic school, this is foundational for us as Catholic schools.
Right. No, and I think, you know, again, that I feel like that's what our mission is to really reach out, right? And to bring them in. And um, you know, teachers will always say, like, you know, this person, I sent this email and they responded with this nasty response, like, you know, well, maybe you have it wrong. As frustrating as that is as a teacher, because it's pretty much constant sometimes, you have to at least understand it. You know, these are parents. They're doing the best job they can. I really genuinely, truly believe that most 99% of parents are doing the best job that they can. So when they're told they're not doing a good job, you know, one way or another, they're going to be defensive. and that's okay. And I think like knowing that before you send that first email and finding a way through that defensiveness, I find self-deprecating humor goes a long way sometimes. Little things like that really helps kind of undermine that shock to the system. And then you can bring them around, but hey, I'm going to be there. We're going to figure this out. I always struggle with the teachers who send like, and I hope Johnny figures out how to be more respectful in class instead of like, we're going to work together to make sure Johnny knows what he needs to do. Those two sentences have such different impacts when you read it. And basically you're saying, I hope he figures it out, like, good luck, Johnny, or I'm going to walk Johnny where he needs to go. As a parent, I mean, even me now, as a parent of two kids in my school, there's times where, I get defensive. I'm like, wait a second. No, I signed that homework book and then I realized I didn't. So, I think we just have to be open and honest with ourselves and being able to check that ego. Yes, we are the professionals, but they are also the parents. They're just as invested as we are, even if they don't always act that way. And we have to, make sure that we're on the same team.
Mhm. So parents are important. Like I look at this equation, you have the students, you have the parents, and then we would be amiss if we didn't talk about the teachers.
Right.
And again, you're starting with relationally centered topics of collaboration, building trust, building community, being unified in mission together as Catholic educators. So how can we better support our teachers?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, I mean, any administrator knows that if your teachers are not at 100%, then your school is at risk. And I think the teachers are the most important piece of a school. They're the lifeblood of the school. They're on the front lines and they're dealing with this stuff all day long. Like I'm going to get a phone call, I'm going to get an email, but they're the ones with Johnny in that classroom all day long. And I think we need to make sure that we support them and that we show them, how to do that. And one is building trust with them, making sure that they understand, why we're doing what we're doing. A lot of these things that we've talked about in terms of like, all right, how can you get the parent on your page? Like being a resource for them. But also at the end of the day, like knowing like what the expectation is. And as a Catholic school, like you are called to be Christ for these kids and for these parents. And if you can't do that, then we need to have that conversation. But if you can, then I'm going to be with you 100% of the way, and we're in this together. And that's, it's a big task to ask, but this is the vocation we're called to do.
I
And helping
think
them. Oh, go ahead, Joey.
Oh, I was gonna say, just like you commented about parents are doing the best they can with the information they have. I believe our educators, 99% of them are doing the best they can
Absolutely.
with the
Yep.
information they have. Like
Right.
they're not there for the money, they're not there
Right.
for the glory and the fame. They're there because they're called to be there.
Right.
They're literally on mission. And so being able to engage with them and connect at that level and then grow together. Like that's
Right.
the power of community, is that not to be stagnant, but to be in process, growing and learning and honing our own skills and competencies, both socially, emotionally, spiritually, and academically, is like how we model that to our students and our family community.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it models all those things that we've talked about all day. But and I've had many conversations with parents who come to me with a complaint about a teacher, and I can confidently say, I mean, 99% of the time, I'm always saying, I understand where you're coming from, I understand how you feel, but I can tell you with full confidence that this teacher acted in the best interest of your child. And that's, maybe I'm fortunate as a principal to be able to say that, but I truly do believe that teachers, if you are in teaching and you don't have the best interests of your students in mind, you wouldn't last very long. So, no matter what's going on, I think acknowledging that these teachers truly are such an impact on our kids and that they truly do care is huge. But then, going down and my approach, and I think we can, kind of summarize everything, is my approach has always been as an administrator to act with like that therapeutic mindset. Like, okay, I need to help this person figure out a resolution to the problem. I could tell them what to do, but they're not going to do it. I need to help show them what I think or what we think together after we work through it. I mean, therapy is usually 80% client, 20% guidance of a therapist, helping that person find their own way to the solutions to their problems, working with all stakeholders together, helping them get to resolve the issue at hand. And I think, you can only do that if you have trust, if you have, you know, this collaborative relationship, if you have this, everyone is on the same page in terms of mission and purpose and that kind of thing. So building up those community pieces really helps impact change. Once I know what you got to work on, then now all that hard work's done because you have all your players, you know, in the dugout, and now you can say, this is the plan. So I think that's really, you know, if I could summarize with one takeaway, is just understanding that we can't force the solution. We have to help grow the solution together, you know.
Again, it's that collaborative conversation and that collaborative mindset that we're on mission together. Eric, you've literally mind dumped a lot of experiences and ideas and concepts. One of the things that I would be amiss is to talk just a moment about Frenzy, how Frenzy, you've talked a lot about a lot of big concepts, and then how do we do that? Like, what steps do we take? And so you've given some very concrete but big ideas. Frenzy at the center is really designed to create connection. It's relationally centered, it's scripturally based, and it's that unified language. So it's all about building culture, climate and culture within our school community. So if anyone has questions specifically and is looking for resources to build on what Eric has talked about, Frenzy is a tool. You can scan the QR code and connect with us, and we'd love to see how we can support you on this journey of creating climates of belonging and connection for your students, for your teachers, and for your parent community, because we know parents are the primary educator of our students. And so how do we proactively and positively engage them? Frenzy provides pathways to really engage that parent community in a way that is positive and proactive. So putting that out there, if you want further conversation and connection, scan the QR code, and we'd love to continue talking with you. Eric, any final closing thoughts before we sign off?
No, just, you know, I know it's a scary place sometimes out there, but you know, I think the one thing I always get from when I go to conferences or meetings with other educators is like, we're not alone. What we're seeing in our schools and our classrooms is happening everywhere. Catholic schools, public schools, at least statistically, most of the time it's a little better in our Catholic schools, but not always guaranteed. So, you know, you're doing God's work, and I thank everybody for the call, you know, answering the call, and you know, just keep the faith, I guess.
Yeah, well, thank you, Eric. Cannot tell you how much I appreciate
Thank you, Joy.
An honor to be able to serve and partner with you in
And wonderful.
small and big ways. And so thank you everyone for joining us, and we will look forward to connecting again.
Yes, thank you.
And once again, I will say thank you for attending today's NCEA webinar. NCEA continuously strives to improve the quality of our services for our members based on feedback. We will use your input to inform future work and improve services. I've already dropped the survey in the chat. I also included a link to Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, if you would like to look at that. If you are interested in a certificate of attendance, please include your email address and name at the end of the survey. Since your certificate will be sent via automated email, please check your spam if you do not see an email within a few minutes. Enjoy the rest of your day.